By the time I stepped outside, 3 SUVs were already parked across my driveway. All to shut down 3 hens and a dream. The morning air still carried that crisp quiet before the neighborhood woke, the kind where you could hear your own heartbeat. I remember clutching my coffee mug, the steam mixing with the breath of panic I didn't want to show. I'd built that coop with my own hands. Red cedar panels, white trim, a small wire gate that creaked when you opened it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A tiny sanctuary of sanity after a year that had nearly broken me. When I moved here to Meadow Ridge, I thought I was finally buying peace. Just a modest home on the edge of town, where the street smelled like fresh-cut grass and the neighbors waved out of habit. I wanted quiet mornings, fresh air, and something living to care for. My therapist had suggested gardening, but I'd gone a step further. 3 hens, small, calm, and perfect. Their soft clucks filled the silence that once kept me company too long. But in this neighborhood, peace had rules, and apparently, my peace broke one. I first met Rick Givens, the HOA president, a month before the confrontation. He was the kind of man who smiled like it cost him nothing but meant even less. He loved control the way other people love their children. Always in a tucked-in golf shirt, a pen clipped neatly to his pocket, and a habit of calling women miss, whether they corrected him or not. When he saw my coop going up, he walked by twice before stopping, clipboard in hand, and said, "You know, Miss Wren, there are health codes for a reason." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. That morning, when he showed up with 2 other board members, there was no laughter left. They stood at the edge of my lawn like they were preparing for a crime scene. Rick's voice was calm, but cold. "This structure," he said, tapping his pen against the coop, "violates Section 7C of our HOA's community health standards." I asked him what that meant exactly. He smiled. "Unsanitary potential. Fecal bacteria. Rodent attraction. You understand." I didn't. My hands were clean, quiet, and fenced. The coop was 20 feet from the house, built with better wood than half the decks on this street. "They're not livestock," I told him. "They're therapy animals." Rick raised a brow. "You plan to sell eggs?" I hesitated. "Maybe someday." He took that as confirmation. "Then they're livestock." He handed me a printed notice from his clipboard, an official HOA violation, a $1,000 fine, and 72 hours to dismantle my coop. The words blurred for a second, like my brain refused to accept what my eyes saw. I tried reasoning with him. "You're overreacting. They're not hurting anyone." Rick's expression didn't change. "It's for everyone's safety. The board must enforce standards equally. You understand?" That phrase again. "You understand." He said it like punctuation, but what I understood was something different. This wasn't about safety, it was about control. About a man who needed to remind everyone whose neighborhood this was. When the SUVs finally left, I sat on the back porch staring at the coop. The hens cooed softly inside, unaware their home had just become illegal. The morning breeze moved through the mesh, carrying the faint scent of cedar and feed. I felt anger tightening in my chest. Not because of what Rick said, but because he believed he could say it and get away with it. That night, I made a decision. If Rick was going to fight me with rules, I'd fight him with the same weapon. Words on paper. I dragged the thick HOA covenant binder from my filing cabinet, the one every homeowner got, but few ever opened. It smelled like dust and control. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, reading page after page until my eyes blurred. Most of it was nonsense. Rules about fence height, mailbox color, how long a garbage can could sit on the curb. But near the bottom of page 48, I found something. Temporary structures not exceeding 60 square feet, built for recreational, seasonal, or personal non-commercial use, shall not constitute a violation. I read that line 3 times. My co-op was 58 square feet. Personal, non-commercial, temporary. It fit perfectly. I highlighted it, underlined it, and copied it word for word into my notebook. For the first time since Rick had shown up, I felt the smallest flicker of control return to me. Maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe he'd miscalculated. But I knew men like Rick. They didn't back down because of logic. They doubled down out of pride. And I could already feel it in my bones. He wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke to an email notification from the HOA office. The subject line stopped me cold. Emergency property inspection. Scheduled 10 a.m. Wednesday. Rick wasn't finished. He was coming back. And this time, he was bringing reinforcements. Power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a polo and carries a clipboard. 2 days after that email, the rumble of tires on gravel told me Rick Givens was back. This time, he didn't come alone. He brought 2 board members, Mr. Peters, who never looked anyone in the eye, and Cheryl Boone, who smiled like she'd practiced in a mirror. Behind them, parked half on the sidewalk, sat a silver SUV with tinted windows. Through the glass, I could just make out Marla Givens, Rick's wife, filming from the passenger seat, her phone raised like a weapon. Rick climbed out, pen already clicking in his hand. "Morning, Miss Wren," he said, tone dripping with artificial politeness. I didn't correct him. I knew he used that word on purpose, to make me sound small, unanchored. He stepped toward the coupe like an officer approaching contraband, clipboard balanced on his arm, the other 2 board members, following his lead like obedient shadows. He didn't knock, didn't even ask permission. He just walked into my yard. "You were notified," he said. "We're here to assess compliance." "Compliance with what exactly?" I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. Rick gestured toward the coupe. "That." The hens stirred softly, curious but unafraid. The morning light caught the polished hinges I'd installed myself. The whole thing looked harmless, beautiful even. But Rick's face twisted as if it were a crime scene. "Unsanitary," he muttered, scribbling notes. "This kind of setup attracts rodents, odors, bacteria. It's a health hazard." I folded my arms. "You got proof of that? Or is it just something you read on the internet?" Rick smiled without humor. "Health standards are subjective, Miss Wren. That's why the board exists, to make judgment calls when safety's at risk." "Safety?" I repeated. "You're talking about 3 hens that eat better than most people. The only thing at risk here is your pride." Mr. Peters coughed awkwardly, but Cheryl kept writing whatever Rick told her to. Marla's phone lens glinted through the SUV window, and I could almost feel it recording every movement, every word, not for evidence, but for humiliation. Rick walked a slow circle around the coupe, clicking his pen in rhythm. "See, this is the problem. People move in, they bring ideas from outside communities, and suddenly we've got pests, smells, unsightly structures. It spreads." I stepped closer. "You mean independence spreads?" He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. For a split second, I saw what he hated. Not the chickens, not the coop, but me. Someone he couldn't control. Someone who didn't flinch. "You agreed to these terms when you bought here," he said evenly. "We maintain standards so everyone feels safe." Safe. That word again. I'd heard it enough times to know it didn't mean what he said. It wasn't about safety. It was about obedience. He didn't want safety. He wanted submission. I took a deep breath and said, "Show me the exact rule I'm breaking." Rick flipped through his papers, eyes scanning until he found something to cling to. Section 7C, subparagraph 3, no livestock or fowl permitted within neighborhood boundaries. It's clear as day. It also says livestock, not pets. I countered. They're not for sale. They're therapy animals. That clause doesn't apply. Rick smirked. Intent defines use. You said yourself you might sell eggs. I said maybe someday. There's no business, no profit. He shrugged. Intent is enough. We have to interpret these things for the community's well-being. That's when it hit me. There was no rulebook strong enough to beat someone who made up his own definitions. He didn't need truth. He needed control disguised as concern. Fear was his favorite policy, and the clipboard was just his badge of office. The board members stepped back as Rick tore off a copy of his report and handed it to me. The board will review this, he said. In the meantime, I'd recommend removing the structure voluntarily. It'll save you money and embarrassment. He started walking back to his car, but paused just long enough to add, "Oh, and expect a formal notice soon. We'll be conducting an emergency health inspection next week." Just standard procedure. The word inspection echoed in my head long after they left. Through the SUV window, I caught one last glimpse of Marla's phone pointed my way before she rolled it up. By the time I turned back toward the coupe, the morning calm had vanished. All I could hear was the faint hum of tires fading down the street, and the sound of my hens rustling in the straw, innocent and oblivious. Rick had drawn the line, and whether I liked it or not, the battle for my backyard had just become a war. They didn't bring a health inspector. They brought a hitman with a clipboard. The following Wednesday, the sound of boots crunching on gravel pulled me out of my kitchen before I'd even finished my coffee. Rick Givens was back, right on schedule, flanked by a man in khakis and mirrored sunglasses who looked more like private security than a county official. The man carried a clipboard too, the kind of prop that gave small men big confidence. Rick waved from the edge of my lawn like he owned it. "Morning, Miss Wren. This is Mr. Carlton. He's here from the county to perform a health and safety inspection." I looked at the stranger, searching for a badge, an ID, anything that screamed official. There was nothing, just a laminated card clipped to his belt that said Environmental Safety Liaison. The words looked printed from a home office. "County inspector, huh?" I said, crossing my arms. "Which department?" Rick didn't answer. Carlton stepped forward, camera phone already raised. "Just standard documentation, ma'am." Without asking, he started snapping photos of my yard, my garden, even my porch. Rick followed him, pointing out imaginary violations like a tour guide of arrogance. "You see that?" he said to Carlton. "Wood structure too close to property line. That'll have to go. Open feed container. Potential contamination risk." I felt heat rising in my chest. "You're trespassing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "and I didn't consent to photographs of my home." Rick turned, smiling in that empty way of his. "You consented when you bought property here, Miss Wren. Community inspections fall under association jurisdiction." "Association jurisdiction doesn't override state privacy law," I said sharply, pulling my phone from my pocket. "And since you're both here uninvited, this is me documenting you." Rick's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Recording me won't change the outcome." "I'm not recording for change," I said. "I'm recording for proof." That got under his skin. He turned to Carlton. "Continue." They moved toward the coupe, Carlton crouching, muttering observations like he was writing a crime report. "Possible waste accumulation. Unsecured waste container. Unapproved feed type." "Unapproved by who?" I asked. "Community health standards," Rick answered. "Show me those standards." Rick didn't. He just started writing faster. Eyes locked on his clipboard as if avoiding mine would make him write. "You've already been fined once," he said. "If you don't comply this time, we'll have no choice but to escalate." "Escalate to what?" I asked. He smirked. "Legal action, property liens. Depends how stubborn you want to be." For a second, the wind died, and all I could hear was the hens cooing behind me. They were quiet creatures, unaware they were the target of a suburban war. I steadied my voice. "You know this inspection's a sham, right? He's not with the county. You're manufacturing violations." Rick's gaze hardened. "Miss Wren, I've got multiple complaints from residents. Odors, noise, sanitation concerns. We act on reports. That's our duty." "Then show me those complaints." "They're confidential." I almost laughed. "You mean imaginary?" His jaw clenched, and for the first time, the calm facade cracked. "Watch yourself," he said softly. "You're on thin ice." "That makes two of us," I replied. Carlton finished his photos, muttered something to Rick, and they both walked back toward the street. Rick scribbled a final note on his clipboard, tore off the top sheet, and handed it to me. "Final warning," he said. "Your fine is now $2,000. Remove the structure within 72 hours or we'll begin legal proceedings. I didn't take the paper. I let it flutter to the ground between us. Rick's eyes followed it down before he turned and walked away. Carlton gave me a look halfway between guilt and indifference, the kind of look men wear when they know they're part of something wrong but too cowardly to stop it. As their car rolled away, I stood there, gripping my phone, the video still recording. I replayed the moment Rick said multiple complaints. There was no paperwork, no names, nothing but intimidation dressed up as authority. That night, I backed up the footage to my computer and wrote everything down, time-stamped and dated. I knew one thing now. This wasn't just about chickens. It was about power. And if he wanted to make this a legal fight, I'd be ready. Legal nugget. In most U.S. states, a homeowner has the right to record anyone on their private property without needing their consent, especially during disputes involving property or HOA enforcement. Documentation can make the difference between intimidation and evidence. The next morning, a HOA new letter appeared in my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead printed across the top. The subject line read, "Final notice, mandatory removal order." Below it, in bold black text, were the words, "Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in legal action." The war had officially begun. If they want to play by the rules, I'll show them who's really breaking them. After that last notice, something inside me hardened. Fear turned into fuel. I realized that no one wins by begging bullies to play fair. You win by exposing their own games. That night, I knocked on my neighbor Lena Ortiz's door. Lena was sharp, fearless, and the only person on this street who'd ever rolled her eyes at Rick Givens in public. She worked in IT, the kind of woman who could find a password in a pile of pixels. She listened quietly as I explained everything. The fines, the fake inspector, the threats. When I showed her the footage I'd recorded, her jaw tightened. "He's bluffing," she said. "I bet half the board's breaking more rules than you are." I almost laughed. "You think so?" She grinned. "Let's find out." We started that night. Lena brought her laptop over to my kitchen table, the glow from her screen reflecting off her glasses. "Every HOA is required to keep its covenants and meeting minutes on public file," she said. "All we need is a little patience, and maybe some caffeine." By midnight, she'd pulled up the county's online record portal. There it was, the Meadow Ridge HOA charter, the amendment logs, and years of board meeting minutes. It was like opening a locked box that no one thought anyone would ever touch. And buried inside it was a pattern. Small exceptions, temporary permits, and conditional approvals, all signed by the same name, R. Givens. Lena leaned closer. "He's been bending his own rules." We cross-referenced property maps, then public permit requests. It didn't take long. Rick's backyard deck, 30 square feet larger than allowed. No inspection, no approval. His wife Marla, operating a home bakery business registered at their address. Against HOA policy. One board member had a tool shed that encroached 6 feet into a shared easement. Another installed a fence that violated the community's height limit. I stared at the screen, disbelief turning into satisfaction. So basically, the people fining me for 3 hens are breaking half their own rules. Lena nodded. "Exactly. It's not about health. It's about hierarchy. You embarrassed him. Now he's trying to make an example of you." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Rick wasn't protecting the community. He was protecting his throne. The HOA wasn't a board. It was a kingdom. And I had just committed the sin of disobedience. Still, knowing their hypocrisy wasn't enough. I needed proof. Real proof. So I started documenting everything. Dates, photos, screenshots, copies of emails. Every time I saw Rick's car parked outside another house, I wrote it down. Every whisper about the board's favoritism went into my file. By the 3rd day, my kitchen table looked like an investigative newsroom. Papers spread across every surface, highlighter marks, running like veins through the evidence. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case. Lena leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. You know, she said, technically, HOA records are public. Anyone can request copies directly from the county clerk's office. Most homeowners don't realize that. That sentence hit me harder than she knew. Legal nugget. Homeowners Association records, including board minutes, permits, and disciplinary actions, are public documents in most states. You can request them from your county clerk's office for a small fee or even view them online. Transparency isn't a privilege. It's a right. I thought about that as I stared at the growing pile of papers. Every document I'd pulled back was another crack in Rick's carefully built empire. I imagined the smug expression he wore during his inspections and wondered how long it would last once the same rules turned on him. For the first time since this fight began, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not victory, not yet, but balance. Like the ground had finally shifted under his feet instead of mine. Lena closed her laptop, smirking. He started this war, she said, but he doesn't know who he's fighting yet. I looked out the window toward Rick's house, its porch light glowing like an unwanted reminder. My Coop sat quietly in the yard, the hens asleep, their soft feathers rustling against the straw. Maybe it's time I showed him, I said. Lena raised an eyebrow. Show him what? I smiled, tired but determined. That if he wants to make this about health, I'll give him health. She leaned forward. Clara, what if you turned their fake health campaign into a real one? The idea landed heavy and electric in the air. For the first time, this wasn't just defense. It was strategy. And I knew right then, this fight was only just beginning. If they want a health campaign, I'll serve it with breakfast. That single line from Lena replayed in my mind for days, taunting me with possibility. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Rick had used health as his weapon. Public sanitation, community safety, biohazard buzzwords. Fine. If health was his excuse to humiliate me, then I'd turn health into my rebellion. Not through shouting or legal threats, but through something he'd never expect. Kindness with a sharp edge. 3 days later, I posted an event online. Farm-to-table brunch, backyard sustainability in Meadow Ridge, donations only. The description was innocent enough. An open community brunch promoting clean food and local living. No fees, no sales, no business. It was technically untouchable. At first, I didn't expect much. Maybe a handful of curious neighbors, a few supportive comments. But by that evening, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Likes, shares, messages from people asking if they could bring their own produce. By midnight, the post had been reshared across 3 local Facebook groups. By morning, a neighborhood blogger wanted to feature it. Then I saw it, an RSVP from Marla Givens, Rick's wife. For a second, I just stared at the name. Either she didn't realize whose event it was, or she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, it made the whole thing twice as interesting. The next few days became a blur of preparation. I scrubbed the patio, sanded the old table, and hung soft white string lights across the fence. The hens clucked curiously every time I carried supplies through the yard, as if sensing that something bigger was coming. The scent of cedar mixed with the crisp sweetness of herbs from my garden. I wanted everything perfect. Not just for show, but for proof. Proof that unsanitary didn't live here. Lena came over every afternoon to help. You know he's going to lose his mind when he finds out, she said, laughing as she arranged mason jars filled with wildflowers. That's the point, I said. If he wants to police health, then let him choke on it. By Thursday night, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. A local eco-blogger messaged me. We're covering your story as a model of suburban sustainability. Hope you don't mind. Mind? I couldn't have scripted better irony if I tried, but not everyone was cheering. Friday morning, I found a crisp envelope taped to my front door. HOA letterhead, Rick's signature at the bottom. The message was short and venomous. Cease and desist notice. Unauthorized commercial activity within residential zoning boundaries. Immediate cancellation required, or legal penalties will apply. I felt my stomach twist, but not from fear, from disbelief. A community potluck, apparently, was a commercial enterprise in Rick's kingdom. I read the letter twice, then handed it to Lena. She laughed out loud. They really think they can shut you down for hosting brunch? I folded the paper and slid it into my binder of evidence. They can try. For the rest of the day, I kept getting texts from neighbors asking if the event was still happening. Each message carried that quiet defiance people get when they're tired of being told what to do. I typed the same reply every time. Yes. Saturday, 10 a.m. Bring your appetite and your curiosity. By nightfall, my backyard looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Wooden tables lined with fresh herbs, baked bread cooling on a rack, sunlight fading through the trees. It wasn't just an event anymore. It was a statement, a challenge wrapped in warmth. When I finally sat down to review the guest list one last time, my eyes caught on a single name I hadn't noticed before. The RSVP list read, M. Givens, +1. I smiled slowly, so Marla was really coming. And apparently, she was bringing company. Whatever happened next, this brunch was going to feed more than just stomachs. It was going to feed a reckoning. They wanted silence. I gave them a guest list. The morning after finding that cease and desist letter taped to my door, I did what Rick Givens least expected. I went public. I took a photo of the letter, typed a caption beneath it, and hit post on the same community page he used to police everyone else. The caption read, "It's not a business. It's a community potluck, and everyone's welcome." Within minutes, the post started spreading. Comments poured in. Neighbors, local residents, even people from nearby towns. Some were shocked, others furious on my behalf. "This is ridiculous," one woman wrote. "They're bullying you." Another said, "We'll bring fresh fruit. Count us in." It was as if the whole town had been waiting for someone to stand up to Meadow Ridge's little monarchy. Lena texted me a screenshot of the post an hour later. "You've gone viral in 3 neighborhoods. Congratulations, you've just declared war." Politely. I laughed, but my hands shook as I typed my reply. "Then let's make sure we win it beautifully." That day, our quiet street transformed into a planning zone. Lena helped me make lists, contact vendors, and coordinate who was bringing what. I wanted everything legitimate, clean, and documented. I even printed signs for hand-washing stations and labeled every ingredient. Not just for presentation, but as armor. "Control the narrative before he does," Lena said. "If this thing's public enough, he can't bury it." By evening, that prophecy was already coming true. Rick's posts started popping up. Short, angry statements on the HOA forum. Unauthorized activity, health violation, community disruption. But the more he posted, the more people pushed back. Homeowners began replying with questions he couldn't answer. Where in the bylaws does it say potlucks are banned? Why are you targeting her and not enforcing real issues? Every argument he made only fueled more support. The HOA board had lost its grip on the narrative, and the community was finally seeing behind the curtain. Still, he wasn't backing off quietly. Late that night, an email arrived from the HOA office, directly from Rick's address. The subject line read, "Final warning." The message was short, clipped, and full of veiled threats. Continuing this event will result in immediate legal action, potential liens, and revocation of property privileges. I read it twice, my pulse pounding. It was intimidation disguised as formality. Lena was sitting across from me when I showed her the email. She didn't flinch. "He's bluffing. He can't revoke what he doesn't own. Keep receipts for everything. If he's stupid enough to escalate, we'll have the paper trail." So I did. Every purchase, every ingredient, every dollar labeled donation only. I even printed flyers clarifying that all proceeds were voluntary community contributions. If Rick wanted a fight, I'd give him one wrapped in legality and sunlight. But beneath all the determination, there was still something heavier. Fear. The kind that sat deep in my chest and whispered, "What if he finds a way? What if he ruins this too?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint clucks of my hens outside, their rhythm steady, grounding. I thought about how something so small, so harmless, had turned into a symbol of defiance, and how far I'd come from that first morning, standing in the dew, terrified and cornered. By dawn, the fear was gone, replaced by resolve. When I opened the event page to finalize details, my eyes caught on one familiar name near the top of the RSVP list, M. Givens, +1. For a long moment, I just stared at it, smiling slowly. Marla hadn't just RSVP'd, she'd confirmed. Whatever game Rick was playing, his wife had just bought tickets to the opening act. If they were hungry for control, I'd feed them the truth instead. The morning of the brunch broke soft and golden, the kind of light that made the whole neighborhood look innocent. The scent of rosemary and butter drifted through the air, wrapping around laughter and the hum of soft music playing from a small speaker on the porch. My backyard, once just a patch of grass and quiet defiance, had transformed overnight into something alive. White tablecloths fluttered in the mild wind, mason jars filled with herbs lined the tables, and fresh bread cooled beside steaming pans of scrambled eggs. By 10 a.m., people began trickling in. Some I knew by name, others I'd only waved to in passing. Today, they came carrying dishes, flowers, and curiosity. Lena greeted each guest with a grin, leading them to the buffet. I moved from table to table, smiling, welcoming, trying to hide the adrenaline pulsing through my chest. Every clink of glass, every burst of laughter felt like rebellion. For once, the neighborhood wasn't whispering about me. It was eating at my table. A few faces looked cautious, scanning for signs of trouble. And then I saw her, Marla Givens, dressed in her usual pristine white blouse, sunglasses perched like armor. She carried a plate piled high with quiche and fruit salad. She smiled, that kind of polite half-smile that said she wanted to be seen doing the right thing. Behind her trailed another woman I didn't recognize. Maybe a friend, maybe a board ally. Clara, Marla said sweetly, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. This is absolutely lovely. You've really outdone yourself. Thank you, I said evenly, ladling a scoop of omelet onto her plate. She took a bite, her face lighting up. These eggs, they're so fresh. Where'd you buy them? I felt Lena glance at me from across the table, trying not to smirk. I wiped my hands on my apron and said calmly, "From my backyard." The fork froze halfway to Marla's mouth. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the silence cracked. A soft laugh from somewhere in the crowd, then another. Someone clapped. Within seconds, the air was buzzing again, but this time with something sharper. Amusement, disbelief, unity. My words had done what weeks of arguing couldn't. They exposed the absurdity of it all. Marla's smile faltered. You mean from your chickens? I nodded. Yes, from my chickens. The ones your husband says are a health risk. Before she could respond, a voice boomed from the gate. This event is unauthorized. Every head turned. Rick Givens stood at the entrance, face red, papers clutched in his hand. His presence hit the yard like a thunderclap. For a moment, even the birds went silent. He looked at the tables, the food, the laughter, and he saw power slipping from his grip. "Miss Wren," he barked, waving the papers. "This violates multiple HOA regulations. No commercial gatherings, no unapproved structures. It's a potluck." I interrupted. "Donations only. Every item here was made by a resident. You're welcome to join us, or you can leave." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras lifted, phones pointed. I could see the exact moment Rick realized he was being recorded. Again, his face darkened, jaw tightening like a spring. "This isn't over," he snapped, his voice shaking between rage and panic. "You're endangering this entire neighborhood with your stunt. You'll hear from the board. Then maybe you should sit down and have breakfast first," I said, gesturing toward the food. "It might help your mood." A few people chuckled. Rick turned toward them, furious, but the laughter only grew. The power he'd wielded for months, the intimidation, the fear, evaporated in the daylight of public scrutiny. He looked suddenly small, surrounded by the very people he claimed to represent. And then, over the sound of his sputtering, came a different noise, low, mechanical, and growing louder. Tires on gravel, a white vehicle pulling up to the curb, marked with a blue county seal. Lena's eyes widened. "Clara, is that?" "It is," I said quietly, my heart pounding. "Right on time." Rick turned to look just as the door opened and a woman in a navy jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand, but this one carried an actual badge. "Good morning," she called out. "I'm Inspector Dana Voss from the County Health Department. I received an invitation to a community brunch." Rick froze, color draining from his face. The audience he'd come to lecture was now turning toward her, toward the real authority he couldn't control. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. They called it dirty, until the state called it perfect. When the county vehicle pulled up, the energy in my yard shifted like a gust of wind through tall grass. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Rick's face, already red with anger, drained to a ghostly white. The woman stepping out of the car was tall, confident, and unmistakably official. Too official for him to spin. She wore a navy jacket with a real county emblem stitched above her name tag, Dana Voss, Environmental Health Division. And unlike Rick's golf buddy from the last inspection, she didn't come to intimidate. She came to observe. She approached with calm authority, clipboard in one hand, ID badge in the other. "Good morning. I'm Inspector Voss," she said. "I understand there's been some concern about health and sanitation here." Rick stumbled forward, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, absolutely, Inspector. We've received multiple complaints from residents about unsanitary conditions, unlicensed food preparation, and livestock violations." Dana nodded politely but didn't write anything down. "I see. And you are?" He straightened. "Rick Givens, HOA president of Meadow Ridge." She tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "Are you a health officer, Mr. Givens?" He blinked, thrown off balance. "No, Good," she said flatly. "Then let me do my job." Laughter rippled quietly through the crowd. Rick stiffened as Dana turned toward me. "Mrs. Wren, may I take a look at your setup?" I nodded. "Of course, Inspector. Everything's open and documented." For the next 20 minutes, Dana moved through the yard with quiet precision. She checked the kitchen area first. Gloves, clean surfaces, covered food. She noted the labeled donation box and the hand-washing station Lena had helped me set up. Then she walked to the coop, bending down to inspect the structure itself. The hens fluttered softly inside, curious but calm. "Nice build," she said. "Clean bedding, proper ventilation, no odor." Rick followed a few paces behind her, nervously wiping sweat from his brow. "You'll notice, though, that this violates our HOA's livestock policy." Dana stood, dusting off her hands. "Livestock," she repeated. "These are backyard hens. No sign of commercial production or sale." "Well," she said, Rick began, but she cut him off. "I don't need speculation, Mr. Givens. I deal in facts, and the fact is, these animals are healthy, contained, and compliant." The words hit like a thunderclap. I heard someone gasp, then a smattering of applause that quickly grew louder. Phones were raised again, capturing every second. The man who'd once ordered me to tear down my coop now stood powerless in front of the same neighbors who had once feared him. Dana walked back toward the tables, jotting notes. "From a health standpoint," she said, voice carrying clearly over the crowd, "this property is fully sanitary and within all local and state standards. There are no violations here." She turned to Rick. "Whoever submitted these complaints, I suggest they educate themselves before wasting the county's time." Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence between them was brutal. Marla, still seated at one of the tables, lowered her phone slowly, her expression unreadable. Dana handed me a signed inspection slip. "Proof of compliance. For your records, Mrs. Wren. Keep this in case anyone else challenges you." I took it, the weight of the paper somehow heavier than it should have been. "Thank you," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "I appreciate your fairness." "Just doing my job," she replied, then smiled faintly. "And for what it's worth, those eggs smell amazing." The crowd burst into applause again. Louder this time, real and raw. For months I'd been the woman fighting shadows, the one labeled defiant, difficult, non-compliant. But now, with the county's own seal on my side, the truth stood tall for everyone to see. Rick's shoulders hunched, his clipboard trembling slightly in his hands. He muttered something to Marla, his voice low but sharp. I couldn't catch every word, but I caught enough to know what came next. "We'll rewrite the rules," he whispered. Marla nodded once, eyes cold. The sound of the crowd drowned out everything else. Laughter, cheers, the click of cameras. But those words stuck in my mind like a warning bell. They'd lost this battle, but Rick wasn't finished. He was already planning the next one. Legal nugget. In most U.S. states, small backyard flocks are protected under agricultural or personal use exemptions. As long as the eggs aren't sold commercially and the space meets health standards, homeowners have the right to keep hens for personal use. Always verify your local ordinances and state agricultural codes before building a coop. As Inspector Voss drove away, I looked back toward Rick's house across the street. His curtain shifted slightly, a silent promise that he'd be back. And for the first time, I was ready for him. They couldn't beat me with rules, so they tried to change them. It took less than a week after the county inspection for the retaliation to begin. The HOA newsletter hit every mailbox in Meadow Ridge with the same smug headline printed across the top: Proposed Amendment for Community Health and Uniformity. Beneath it, in cold bureaucratic language, was the dagger. Effective immediately upon approval. No animal housing structures, co-ops, or related enclosures shall be permitted within community boundaries. They didn't even bother hiding the motive. It was Rick's revenge, neatly typed and mailed under the guise of safety. I stood at the curb, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. Around me, a few neighbors lingered, reading their copies too. Some shook their heads. Others muttered. Everyone knew who this was aimed at. That evening, Lena stormed into my kitchen with her copy crumpled in her fist. "He's lost it," she said. "He actually wants to rewrite the entire bylaw just to punish you." I nodded. "Then we'll remind him who these rules belong to." We spent that night researching the process for amendments. Buried deep in the association's charter, page 63, subsection 9, was a lifeline. Any proposed amendment required not only board approval, but also a majority vote from homeowners to pass. In other words, Rick could propose all he wanted, but without the neighborhood's backing, his rule was just paper. The next morning, I drafted a petition. The heading read, "Protect Homeowner Rights, Stop the Overreach." I printed 20 copies, stapled each one to a clipboard, and started knocking on doors. The first few houses were hesitant. Old habits die slow in HOA country. Some neighbors whispered their support but refused to sign, afraid of retaliation. But it only took one signature, one brave mark of ink, before the tide began to shift. By the end of the second day, I had 20 signatures. By the third, 40. People began approaching me. Parents, retirees, even those who'd stayed neutral before. "It's not about chickens anymore," one man told me. "It's about how far he'll go if no one stands up to him." The unity felt electric, like the neighborhood was finally remembering what community actually meant. Lena handled the online outreach, creating a digital version of the petition that spread across local groups. Support poured in from nearby neighborhoods, homeowners tired of their own tyrant boards. And then came the surprise. A quiet knock on my door one afternoon. It was June Hollis, the oldest board member, her silver hair pinned neatly back, her posture as straight as her reputation. She'd always been polite but distant, a woman of few words and careful loyalties. She stepped inside, glancing around before she spoke. "Rick's been calling meetings without notifying the full board," she said. He's trying to fast-track the amendment before anyone can organize a response. I offered her a seat, my heart racing. So you're against it? June hesitated. I don't like bullies. And I don't like people who forget the rules they're meant to follow. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. Legal nugget. In most states, HOA amendments can only take effect if they receive majority homeowner approval, not just board votes. Homeowners have the right to challenge or petition against new rules that restrict property rights. Transparency and participation are key tools against HOA abuse. Within a week, the community was buzzing louder than it ever had under Rick's control. Yard signs popped up reading, "Keep our rights, keep our yards." Rick tried to silence the conversation by closing comment sections online, but people had already stopped listening to him. They were listening to me. It was strange, standing there in my backyard, the same space where I'd once cried out of fear, and realizing I'd become something more than just the woman with the chickens. I'd become the voice of everyone who'd been afraid to speak, the woman they pointed to and said, "If she can fight back, maybe we can too." Still, Rick wasn't finished. The final vote was set for the following Thursday night. Every homeowner in Meadow Ridge was invited to attend, and sitting on that board would be one person whose vote could tip the scales either way. June Hollis. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the petition lying beside a cooling cup of tea. 58 signatures in total. Enough to challenge him, but maybe not enough to win. I looked out the window toward Rick's house, its porch light burning like a challenge in the dark. "This isn't over," I whispered, because if Rick Givens thought rewriting the rules would end the fight, he was about to learn that the rules worked both ways. Sometimes, one quiet voice can silence a tyrant. The night of the vote, the community center felt like a courtroom. Every chair was filled. Every whisper carried tension. Even the fluorescent lights buzzed with unease. For the first time since I'd moved to Meadow Ridge, people weren't there to listen. They were there to decide. The fate of every backyard, every fence, every ounce of freedom in this neighborhood balanced on a single piece of paper. Proposed amendment. No animal housing structures. Rick Givens stood at the front of the room like a man rehearsing for power. He wore a tailored navy blazer, his HOA pin gleaming under the harsh lights. Behind him sat the board members, Cheryl Boone staring nervously at her notes, Mr. Peters avoiding eye contact, and June Hollis, calm and unreadable. Rick tapped the microphone. "Good evening, residents. Thank you for attending this very important meeting. I want to start by reminding everyone that our priority, my priority, is your safety." The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others crossed their arms. I stood near the back, petition papers tucked under my arm, Lena at my side. Rick continued, his voice smooth but heavy with manipulation. "We've all seen how one person's choices can affect an entire community. Health concerns, property values, neighborhood aesthetics, these are serious matters. This amendment isn't about punishment. It's about preservation. We must protect Meadow Ridge from slipping into chaos." He paused, letting his words settle like a fog. Then his gaze locked on me. "Some of us," he said pointedly, "believe that personal freedoms outweigh community responsibility. But that's not how a neighborhood thrives." A murmur ran through the room. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Lena squeezed my hand. "Your turn," she whispered. I walked down the aisle, the sound of my footsteps louder than I wanted. Rick's eyes narrowed as I approached the microphone. "Mr. Givens talks about community," I began, "but what he means is control. He calls this amendment preservation, but what he's really preserving is his power." Gasps scattered across the audience. Rick leaned back, pretending to look unaffected, but his jaw twitched. "I moved here," I continued, "for peace. I built a small coop, not for business, not for profit, but for sanity. And in return, I was fined, harassed, and publicly humiliated. All because someone decided that my peace didn't fit their version of perfection." I paused, letting silence breathe between sentences. "This isn't about chickens. This is about choice, about fairness, about who gets to decide how we live on property we've worked our entire lives to afford. Across the room, people nodded, quietly at first, then more boldly. I turned toward the board. If the HOA truly represents the community, then listen to it. Because the community is speaking right now. For a moment, no one moved. Then applause began, small, cautious, before rolling across the room like thunder. Rick's face hardened. He slammed his hand on the table. Enough! This meeting will remain in order. When the room quieted, he spoke again, voice brittle. We will now proceed with the vote. Board members only. Cheryl Boone voted first. Yes, to approve. Mr. Peters followed, voice uncertain. Yes. Rick of course said, absolutely yes. 3 votes. 1 left. All eyes turned to June Hollis. The old woman sat still for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper in front of her. The silence stretched so long that even the air felt heavy. Finally she rose from her chair, slow but steady. I've lived in Meadow Ridge for 20 years, she said softly, and I've watched more rules written than kindness shown. This community was supposed to make people feel safe, not small. Rick started to interject, but June lifted her hand. You've spoken enough. Then she turned toward me and smiled. I vote no. The room erupted. Cheers, clapping, laughter. The sound of relief and rebellion all at once. The amendment failed. My Coop, and everyone else's rights, survived. Rick stood motionless, his face drained of color. Then, without a word, he gathered his papers and stormed toward the exit. The door slammed behind him so hard it rattled the walls. But not everyone followed. Marla Givens remained seated in the front row, her hands folded neatly in her lap. As the crowd celebrated, she glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. A small, knowing smile that chilled me more than her husband's rage ever had. Lena leaned close and whispered, why do I feel like she's smiling because she knows something we don't? I watched Marla stand and walk toward the door, her calm composure cutting through the chaos like a blade. She looked back one last time. And I understood. This battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The same board that tried to break me now asks for my help. 3 months after the vote, the neighborhood that once whispered behind closed doors had found its voice. The HOA's tight grip had loosened. Meetings were now open, minutes were publicly posted, and residents actually attended. It was as if the whole place had exhaled after years of holding its breath. But the biggest change came quietly, without ceremony. A single sheet of paper taped to the HOA office door. Rick Givens. Resignation effective immediately. No speech, no apology, not even a meeting. Just a signature and silence. Word spread faster than any of his old memos ever had. Some people said he'd stepped down to focus on family. Others claimed he was pressured out by the board after an ethics complaint reached the county. I didn't need the details. For the first time in a long time, Meadow Ridge didn't belong to him anymore. When the new board election came, something unexpected happened. People who had never voted before showed up. Retirees, young families, even the quiet ones who used to avoid eye contact when Rick passed by. Transparency had become contagious. By the end of the night, 3 new faces were sworn in, including Lena Ortiz, who grinned at me from behind her new nameplate as Community Engagement Chair. A few weeks later, I got a letter of my own. But this one didn't come with threats or fines. It was an invitation. Dear Mrs. Wren, the new board would like to formally invite you to chair our newly formed Sustainability Subcommittee, focused on community gardens, clean energy, and sustainable living education. We believe your experience and leadership would be invaluable to this effort. For a long moment, I just stared at the letter. I'd fought them, exposed them, and nearly lost my sanity to their rules. And now, they wanted me to help rewrite the playbook. When I showed the letter to Lena, she smirked. Poetic justice, she said. It was more than that. It was proof that change wasn't just possible. It was already happening. I accepted the offer. The first meeting I chaired was surreal. The same chairs, the same tables, even the same fluorescent hum. But the tone was different. People laughed, listened, argued respectfully. We discussed composting, rain barrels, shared vegetable plots. For the first time, Meadow Ridge felt like a neighborhood instead of a gated cage. I helped residents apply for permits correctly, taught them how to file modification requests without getting trapped in technicalities. I even created a public guide called Know Your Bylaws, showing homeowners exactly where their rights began and ended. I wanted no one else to be blindsided the way I had been. Within months, the change became visible. Backyards once sterile with manicured lawns now bloomed with vegetables and flowers. The HOA started hosting garden Saturdays, where neighbors swapped produce and shared compost. Kids painted signs for the new community food drive. What began as one woman's fight for a chicken coop had turned into a quiet revolution. A neighborhood finally learning how to live, not just conform. Sometimes, during meetings, I'd glance at the chair Rick used to occupy. That worn leather seat where he once lectured and threatened. Now, it sat empty, replaced by an open sign-up sheet for residents who wanted to contribute ideas. His absence felt symbolic, like sunlight filling the space where control once lived. But as peace settled back into the rhythm of Meadow Ridge, a shadow began to stir again. It started as whispers. Someone at the post office, a conversation overheard at the cafe. Rumors that Rick wasn't done after all, that he'd hired a lawyer. One afternoon, Lena walked into my office holding her phone, her face pale. "You're not gonna like this," she said, handing it to me. The screen showed a local blog. Headline: Former HOA president plans to file defamation suit against ex-homeowner activist. Underneath was my name. For a moment, the air felt thin. The quiet peace I'd built suddenly trembled like glass under pressure. I exhaled slowly, feeling that old familiar burn of anger rise again. "If he wants another fight," I said, setting the phone down, "he's about to learn that I don't back down. Not anymore." The coop still stood strong in my backyard, the hens clucking softly in the late afternoon light, living proof that I'd survived worse than Rick's paper wars. And if he wanted another round, I was ready to show him what justice really looked like. They tried to cage my peace, but I built wings instead. Sometimes I still wake before sunrise, the air carrying that same crisp quiet it did the morning Rick first came for my chickens. Only now, when I step out onto the porch, I'm greeted not by fear, but by calm. Feathers rustling, hens cooing, and the hum of a community that finally found its balance. The coop stands exactly where it always did, red and sturdy, not as rebellion, but as proof of endurance. A year ago, I was fighting fines and fear. Now the same neighborhood that once watched in silence fills my yard for our farm-to-table brunch for change. What started as defiance turned into tradition. Every plate sold funds gardens, veterans food programs, and kids nutrition drives. The same hens that nearly cost me everything now feed the people who once doubted me. When Rick's name appeared in a lawsuit headline, the fear returned, sharp but fleeting. I called Lena. She arrived with coffee and calm, just like the old days. "He's desperate," she said. "You took away his power." I smiled. Let him try. Truth stronger than his lawyer. By then, the fight had outgrown me. Messages poured in from across the country. Homeowners, veterans, parents, people who saw my story and realized they weren't alone. One veteran wrote, "They made me take down my flagpole. Your story reminded me freedom doesn't end at the property line." That's when I understood. This wasn't about law. It was about awareness. So I started Know Your Ground, a small online series explaining homeowner rights in plain language. Meetings, voting, due process, told as stories, not statutes. Change spreads through connection, not paperwork. Freedom starts in your backyard. I say it every time now, because it does. It begins with knowing your rights, with refusing to let fear dictate your peace. I used to think the Coop was a symbol of independence. Now I see it's a lesson that small fights matter. The law isn't the enemy. Ignorance is. By summer, the neighborhood had transformed. Gardens bloomed where fear once lived. Kids picked tomatoes, neighbors shared produce, and laughter replaced gossip. Lena waved from across the fence one day and said, "You could run for the board, you." No. Imagine Rick's face. I laughed. I already chair the subcommittee. That's enough politics. Still, the thought lingered. At the next brunch, I spoke from the patio as guests gathered with plates and folding chairs. When I moved here, I said, I thought this community was built on order. But I learned no rule can replace compassion. Rules should protect, not punish. And when they don't, we fix them. I looked toward the Coop. They tried to cage my peace, but I built wings instead, and now I fly exactly where I please. Applause rippled through the yard. The hens clucked softly in the background, as if approving. I held up one white egg, warm from the nest. This, I said, is proof that even the smallest thing can start a revolution. I smiled into the mic. Ever fought your HOA's hypocrisy? Would you stand up for your right to live free? Smash like if you'd join my next brunch. Laughter turned to cheers, echoing through the yard. For once, I didn't feel like I was fighting, I was leading. But peace, I've learned, never lasts forever. Later that evening, I saw it. A new letter in my mailbox, thick, stamped, and coldly familiar. Rick Givens. The war wasn't over yet. If you've ever stood your ground against power, this story was for you. Tell me, would you have fought back or torn the Coop down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe freedom should never come with a fine, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for the next chapter, when Rick takes me to court and learns what justice really looks like. Because in this neighborhood, silence isn't an option anymore.